In my view, if you're looking at the right since the beginning of November, you've won the White House, you've won Congress, you control the court, you're the wealthiest, most powerful, arguably, man in the world, controls the most important social media platform in the world and has the ear of the president. I would say, are you tired of all this winning? You're winning. And yet many of the people that are most influential inside the MAGA movement are not acting like people who have won. In other words, rather than taking the moment and graciously welcome in newcomers, they're, in my view, repelling those people by doing things like, ironically, Nazi saluting, which is what we just saw at CPAC with Steve Bannon and then this Mexican actor whose name escapes me. Now, of course, when Elon Musk first did it, I think it was on Inauguration Day, it came alongside him saying, "My heart goes out to you," and everyone kind of gave him a pass. I certainly did. I did not think it was a Nazi salute. And yet now we have this kind of mimetic, imitative, are they doing Nazi salutes ironically? What's going on here? And the way I'm understanding it is not that they are sincere in their Hitlerian worldview. I do not think Rachel Maddow and Joyanne Reid have been right for the past decade. But I think that they are still acting like online trolls that have no power, when in fact they have a lot of power. And I find this to be a kind of interesting phenomenon because I think it's one that you could look at as a mirror image of some of what's happened on the far left over the past while. Batya, I know you saw Steve Bannon at CPAC after he made that salute, and I'm wondering what you make of it, both him and the phenomenon more broadly.
Well, I can tell you just on the Steve Bannon front, his response was not a salute, the same wave I do to the War Room Posse after my motivational speeches, which I've seen him do. He said, he sent me another picture of him doing it 7 years ago. It's not a Nazi salute. That's not how he meant it. And then he said that I could also convey the message that the French politician that waved off and refused to appear at CPAC, he is a pussy, too weak to govern France. Sorry, Ima. I try not to swear publicly, but so in his mind, he was not.
He's talking there. It's important to clarify. He's not talking there about a Green Party member. He's talking about Jordan Bardella, who is the head of Le Pen's party in France.
Right. So,
not exactly a squish.
Well, compared to Steve Bannon's standards, it turns out he is. I would push back on that, Barry. I would say, first, Brianna, I think the reason the Democrats are scrambling to find messaging on minorities and LGBT issues is because nobody believes that Trump actually poses a threat to these people. And I think that that's what they've spent the last year and the last month and 2 months and 3 months really proving. Trump is a centrist. He is not an extremist. If you look just at the policy on every issue, he represents where the vast majority of Americans are at, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether, don't want to fund it. Israel, want to support it. Immigration, want much less of it. Health, want much more of it. On every issue, he is where they are. This is a person who appointed the highest ranking out gay in American history, Scott Bessent, to the Treasury. It's just falling flat because the perceived threat from the other side is no longer a compelling one because it was a media invention. And Barry, I think, maybe to somebody who's not being impacted as directly by all of this stuff, it seems like the online trolls are still online trolling. The online trolls are still online trolling. That's not the MAGA movement. If you look at what Donald Trump has accomplished in 3-4 weeks, it's astonishing. And the moderation and the popularity of it inherently involved welcoming in Tulsi Gabbard, Democratic presidential candidate. RFK Jr., still a liberal as far as I can tell on pretty much everything, including abortion. Pete Hegseth, they just announced that they are radically shrinking the Pentagon. It's so funny because the left was trying to troll Trump and say, you want to make cuts, why don't you start with the military-industrial complex? And Trump was like, good point. Why don't we do that? Let's fire thousands of people there. He is outgunning the left. He's outflanking them to the left on every single issue. This is what winning looks like. And yeah, I am getting sick of it. I'm getting sick of the feeling of like one feels jubilant, not just because this is exactly what he was elected to do, but because he is totally nailing it on so many issues, maintaining that dead center that the American people elected him to do. And I think, again, I am volunteering to come to any of these emergency meetings and explain to Democrats, like the pathway back to the White House is where you were in the 90s, because that's where Trump is now.
Batya, supporting or switching sides on Ukraine and effectively teaming up with a dictator who has genocidal intentions in Ukraine is not centrist. And I don't think the American people voted for dictatorship support. And if they did, they weren't paying attention.
That's not how we talk about our neighbors. We don't think of them as being uninformed or voting for the wrong thing. That is 100% what they voted for. It is what hundreds of working class people on both parties told me they wanted. They do not understand why we are funding this war, why this is our business, why this is our fight. And that is exactly what they voted for. And it's not even just Republicans. This is a very, very unpopular issue with American voters. You may not like that. You may not like them for that. But this is why Donald Trump won, because he said, oh, this is what you want. This is what I'm going to do, because I'm a public servant and my job is to do what you want, not to judge you for not having the right politics.
I think it's a fair point that Biden was not able to make the case for Ukraine because, again, we have not had a president in the public eye for 4 years before Trump. So I think I will be very generous and say I think that's a fair point that the American people don't understand that. But I don't think they're fans of Vladimir Putin. I think most Americans understand Putin is a murderous dictator and is a terrible guy. And I think it's pretty disturbing to a lot of people to see our president like glazing for one of the worst people in the entire world. I'm old enough to remember like Ronald Reagan, the 80s, the evil empire, no further Mr. Gorbachev. And now we've got a president that is just 100% endorsing, like literally reversing the order of the victim and the oppressor here, like saying, Ukraine is the one that started the war. It's crazy town.
But isn't there a difference between what I think a lot of people on the right and in the MAGA base believe, which is, look at the way our communities have been decimated here at home. We can't afford a decent life. Why are we sending hundreds of billions of dollars to a war far away? And what the president has done over the past few days, which is offer I'll be generous, totally revisionist view of the past few years. Like, I don't think that most Americans, even if they believe that we shouldn't be as deep in that war, that perhaps we shouldn't be funding it, that Europeans, and I agree with this, should step up further for their defense. You can believe all of that, but be appalled at the idea that an American president would be basically repeating the propaganda lines of Putin and acting as if the smaller nation that was invaded somehow deserved to be invaded from an imperialist power. That's, I think, what people are outraged by.
Well, it depends when you say outraged, people are outraged. What I would say is a few things. The first is the American people didn't elect Donald Trump to be a historian of this war. They elected him to stop it and to put an end to it. And as far as I can tell, he has a very clear strategy for doing that.
I don't think he does. I honestly don't think he does. We're looking at NATO troops, British troops and French troops now being deployed to Ukraine. Article 5 of the NATO alliance means that an attack on French or British troops drags the US into war. What may happen is an escalation into World War III, the counterfactual to sending more aid to Ukraine so that Ukraine people can fight their own war, is dragging Europe into war with Russia. And now we know how that turns out because that happened in World War II. So I think this simplistic idea that we just switch off the aid to Ukraine and suddenly the war ends is very naive.
That's not what I was going to say was Donald Trump's plan for ending the war in Ukraine. But I mean, if you think that Donald Trump is going to deploy American troops, if
I did
She didn't
not
say that.
I didn't,
Russia, he's not.
She didn't
I
say
didn't
that.
say that. I said British and French
You
troops
said
will be
if the
deployed.
Russians shoot on them, then America will have to join the war. That's what you said.
Well,
And I'm
that's
just
what the
telling you-
NATO agreement is
Exactly.
about.
And I'm telling you,
So
if you think that Donald Trump's going to honor that. I have a bridge to tell you. Here's what Trump is trying to do. First of all, I think he came into this with a sense that when he met with Zelensky, Zelensky would be unbelievably grateful for the $200 billion in American taxpayer dollars that he was given to wage this war and to hang on as long as he did, and would be very willing to end the war and stop the bloodshed. 1 million men are dead, many of them Zelensky's own people. I think Trump was rather shocked and horrified when Zelensky not only seemed reluctant to come to the table to put an end to the war, but then gave him a hard time about this deal with the rare minerals where the Americans would recuperate some of that aid back. And I think he got very angry at that because, of course, it is extremely angering to be told that after the immense generosity that America has shown to Ukraine. And as a result of that, he has been talking about Zelensky in a way that he feels represents how he feels about it. Now, the strategy here is Donald Trump is not a liberal. Liberals believe that diplomacy has to happen between equals. And so when you have a situation like the Palestinians and the Israelis, let's say, and the Palestinians have much less power, the Obama-Biden doctrine, the liberal democratic doctrine is, well, you must give power to the weaker person and weaken the stronger person, get them to some sort of even playing field, and then you can have a deal between equals. Of course, it's nonsense. It never works, and it never worked because equals have absolutely no incentive to come to the table because they're equals. Why would they're in equal footing? The weaker party knows that they're going to keep getting supported by the empirical power, whatever, and the stronger party feels like they're about to get weakened. Why would they come to the table? Donald Trump is a real estate magnate. He sees it totally differently. The way you get to a negotiation, the way you get to a really good agreement is you need a power imbalance. You need one person who has no power, who is much weaker, who has massive incentive to come to the table, and another party that has a lot of power and will be guaranteed to keep that power. And that way, both people have incentives to come to the table. And I think that he is actually playing Putin like a fiddle. He knows that Putin, who has endless cannon fodder and nuclear weapons, has absolutely zero incentive to come to the table. And Ukraine, now that they have been promised by the Biden administration endless American support, well, they didn't want to come to the table when they were losing, and they also didn't want to come to the table when they were winning. And what Trump did was he showed up and said, look, there's a power imbalance here. We've been propping up the weaker side and alienating the stronger side. And what I need to do is say to Putin, that very reason that you had for going in the first place, NATO expansion, is not going to happen. So come to the table. Let's put an end to this war, because Donald Trump, he truly hates war. He truly thinks that it is a total waste. And I think that's what he's doing here by building up Putin, and then by, I think actually he's genuinely angry at Zelensky at this point, who screamed at Scott Bessent over this rare minerals deal.
Look, I'm not going to denigrate Trump's negotiating abilities, and it's early days in the negotiations. However, this idea that it stops at half of Ukraine or the land that Russia has already gained in Ukraine is fanciful. Have we forgotten Have we forgotten the USSR? Have we forgotten why NATO was established in the first place? Half of Eastern Europe was under Soviet control not that long ago. Putin is not going to stop until Ukraine is wiped off the map. This attitude reminds me of the left-wingers who think that Hamas will be placated if you just give a little bit of land of Israel to the Palestinians. There's a denial of genocidal intent. Obviously, Hamas want to wipe Israel off the map. They want to kill every last Jew who is alive. When it comes to Putin, he wants Ukraine to be wiped off the map. If Trump goes to him and says, "You can keep the land that you've captured in your war efforts," that's not necessarily going to be enough for Putin.
So Claire, how do you think this ends? Like what? How do you think this actually ends? With you're fighting a superpower with nuclear power and endless cannon fodder. How do you think the war ends? It's interesting to me.
Well, I don't think Trump is wrong on everything. I do think the Europeans have a huge responsibility, and they've shirked their responsibility to build up their own militaries to deter Russia. And I think that's actually a huge failure of Merkel in particular, of Germany. Obviously, European nations have to commit more to defence spending. They have to go beyond 2% of their GDP, and they need to get together to resist Russian aggression. But I do think it is naive to believe that this war will end with these negotiation talks. I think
so. How do you think it will end? You think that they're going to expel Russia from Crimea and the Donbass with what? French troops? That's how you think this should end? Really?
I'm not going to predict how it will end.
No, I just need an alternative to Trump's. What's an alternative?
Putin needs to be given a bloody nose, and the Europeans need to do it. I just don't think the deal that is going to miraculously occur is going to end the aggression. And
so French troops on the ground.
If Putin is not deterred,
okay, how deterred? How?
I can answer this. One of my really big complaints with Biden is he has not gotten really serious about helping Ukraine win this war. Russia does this thing constantly. They're like, oh, we're going to have World War III. Don't you dare do that, United States. We're going to have World War III. And they just make us back down, back down, back down. This is exactly what happened with Obama when they invaded Crimea. And for the last 4 years, Zelensky's been out here saying, look, give us American jets, give us air support, help us really get out here and win this war, give us the weapons we need, let's really do it. Don't forget that, I know your good friend Batya, Elon Musk, he shut down Starlink, so they didn't even have intelligence being sent into there, which had massive consequences for our intel operations there. So I say, if you really want Donald Trump to be a president the Americans look back on and go, wow, that was a fantastic guy, how about he gets in there and does the job that Biden wouldn't? Give them the actual weapons to win the war, build some international support. Don't count on Europe to do this. Let's see some real leadership. Biden just was flat out too weak to do this. I want to see it.
Hey guys, Bari here. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the latest episode of Honestly. If you want to watch the full conversation and support the work that we do here at the Free Press of fearless, independent journalism, subscribe today at the top link in this video's description, or go to thefp.com/member.